Okay, here we are, the number of us here from various and sundry states of being. So let's pray together. Dear God, we have gathered together in your presence. God, we know that there are few of us here, but there will be more that listen to these recordings. God, there may even be a stranger that none of us know that tune in and listen. We pray, God, that your voice will be heard as we study, as we question each other, as we work through the printed word. Let it be a word that is embedded in our hearts. Open our ears and our hearts. Open our mouths with the words that you want us to say. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Last week, someone tell me where we left off.
Somebody turned into salt.
Somebody
Salt.
into salt.
Salt, Lot's wife. That's right.
That's right. Lot's wife. So,
By the way, that was quite a recording. Whew. Wow.
pretty intense. Wait till this week. This is going to be something. So, well, I did a little more research on Sodom and Gomorrah. So we talked about the sins of what it was with Sodom, and it was more than what is surface value. We talked about that. If you want to know, listen to the recording if you haven't heard it. But what about this? What happened to Sodom and Gomorrah?
Yeah, he destroyed the city.
Okay, so what exactly? What did it say happened to it? Because we are in Genesis chapter 19.
19.
19 is where we are.
Fire, smoke and fire and
Okay. So do you
burning.
think this is a true story? Do you think there was actually an event where there was these two cities that were destroyed by fire and brimstone?
You know, I'm with Dottie. I mean, if the Bible says it, I believe it.
There you go.
Could have been a volcano or
All life.
eruption.
Okay.
God had a part in it.
Yeah.
I've been looking at some, and I try to look at sources that aren't Christian, because sometimes Christians will kind of reach at any little kind of glim and do it. But there seems to be evidence that these cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, they have been situated at the end of the Dead Sea, and that the Dead Sea may have been part of this volcanic eruption. And they sit right on this fault line. And one side, I said, claimed to have even found the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah. So this appears that this was a natural, actual event, and that even the fire and brimstone, the burning of fire and brimstone, if it had been an earthquake with this volcanic event, that the substances that are in the area would have caused these fiery balls to go into the sky and look like it was raining down fire and brimstone. And so the places where it went and where it wasn't go exactly towards the biblical story.
Do you want me to do a little research while I'm there?
You can certainly do that. I'm sure you will. So the question I had when I read through that was, this story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah developed after the cities were destroyed, or was it one that was before? And there is no answer, but it's just one I just think about. There's an explanation. So this one I was thinking particularly, I'm glad that Dottie is here, that this was a natural event that happened, explainable. It was a volcanic eruption. It's just that the timing of it happened to be perfect at the time that God needed it. So then the question that Dottie and I have debated over years, if there is a natural explanation for something,
Is it a
that
miracle?
occurs at the right time, is it still a miracle? Dottie
You
says no.
gotta get the time, you gotta get
He
the timing
says-
right.
What'd you say, Dan?
You gotta get the timing right, so I think that's the miracle.
Like if you go through the plague
Agreed.
in the book of Exodus, the 10 plagues, there is a natural explanation for all of them. That there was this red tide that caused the river to turn red, and when the Nile River turned red, it caused the frogs to leave the river, which was the plague of the frogs, and the frogs were out of the river and died, which then caused the flies to come, and all of them were explainable. You could see that. So, but some people think that if there is an explanation, it can't be a miracle. And I say, well, but God uses them at exactly the right time and place. So I'm with Dan that the timing is the miracle.
Mhm.
So anyways, there was. So with this source that I looked at also said that it could explain what happened to Lot's wife, because if there's this fiery rock and it hits her, it would immediately have turned her into ash. Just poof, disintegrated her. So it would have looked like a pile of salt, just this ash.
But doesn't it call it a pillar of salt?
Not a pillar of salt, but so
You're-
translations. A
Pile and a pillar aren't the same thing, just saying.
Well, maybe it was a tall pile of salt. Or maybe it just was that her structure, her frame was still there. I don't know. But it could be explainable through that.
Hmm.
So anyway, she shouldn't have turned around at that moment.
There you go.
She should have kept
Well,
on running and would have missed it by a couple of feet.
You know, when I was listening and I was reading in the Bible, Mary and I have the Life Application Bible, I did like how they explained maybe how you can look at it with her turning back, because I never quite understood the importance of that. And it said in our Bible that Lot's wife turned back to look at the smoldering city, and clinging to the past, she was unwilling to then to turn completely away. You can't make progress with God as long as you are holding on to pieces of your old life. And I thought, ooh, that helped me understand it a little more too, or think of it in a different way.
Yeah. Or just even that she may have been hesitant. And
Right.
so the angels are dragging Lot and the daughters, and they start running, and she's hesitant, and she's far enough behind that
Mm.
the fire gets her as they're running away. So all of that, she's not ready to leave. Okay. So you thought last week was wild. Wait till this week. We're getting into deep, deep water. So we've got Lot is now in the city of Zor, this little city, the little valley, and he and his two daughters are there. Now remember, the daughters had fiancés who are now pillars of something in the middle of this smoldering city. The wife is gone, so Lot and the daughters are in the city of Zor, and Abraham is up in the mountains where they divided before, way before, and he could watch this whole destruction going. So do we even know if Abraham and Lot meet again? If Abraham knows that Lot escaped? We never hear that. But we know that because we never hear from Lot again after this next story. So we are now in Genesis chapter 19, and we're reading 30 through 38. Someone who's brave can read
Yeah,
it.
I was gonna say, I don't think I want to read that. I will
I'm
though.
brave.
Oh, Tom will do it. Yay.
Yay,
go.
Tom.
30 through what? 30 through where?
38.
30 through
Uh,
38.
Because Lot was afraid to stay in Zor, he and his two daughters moved up into the hills and lived in a cave. The older daughter said to her sister, "Our father is getting old, and there are no men in the whole world to marry us so that we can have children. come on, let's go get our father drunk so that we can sleep with him
Good Lord.
and have children with him. Jeepers creeps. Somebody else read. That night they gave him wine to drink, and the older daughter had intercourse with him. But he was so drunk that he didn't know it. The next day, the older daughter said to her sister, I slept with him last night. Now let's get him drunk again tonight, and you sleep with him. Then each of us will have a child by our father. So that night they got him drunk, and the younger daughter had intercourse with him. Again, he was so drunk that he didn't know it. In this way, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. The older daughter had a son who she named Moab. He was the ancestor of the present day Moabites. The younger daughter also had a son whom she named Benami. He was the ancestor of the present day Ammonites. You want me
Okay.
to repeat that?
I read it. How many of you remember this story, reading it before?
I didn't.
I
Right
read
on.
it. I have read it.
This is a pretty amazing story. So let's get the setting. So Lot and his daughters ran away to the city of Zor, and for some reason they didn't stay there. I'm gonna say he was afraid. It was because something happened in Zor. Maybe he was a foreigner, and they said, "Did you just come from Sodom and Gomorrah? Were you the one responsible?" Who knows? Maybe they had. Remember, the angel wanted him to flee all the way to the hills in the first place. So maybe the people of Zor had some of the same things going on as they had in Sodom and Gomorrah. And maybe he was afraid of what they were going to do to him. Whatever the reason, Lot is now, so let's go back. He gave up his wandering tent living lifestyle to have a nice house in the city. And in the city, all of this horrible stuff happened. He left. And so instead ending up in a nice tent, he ended up living in a cave with his daughters, completely exiled from everyone. So it's a pretty dismal place to be. And whatever reason he thinks he can't go back to Abraham, whatever, he's there. So why do you think this story, remember we're sitting around the campfire, why would you tell this story for people in the future to hear?
Well, that's how the family line continued, is what just one line says.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Moabite, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Carol.
I was going to say the Moabites and the Ammonites, were they enemies of the Israelites?
Ooh,
I mean, Ruth was a Moabite,
right.
wasn't she? And so they had to tell this story to tell the origin
There you go.
of the enemies.
Wanted these enemies to.
Carol, you go, girl.
Hey,
Yeah.
I've been prepping for this trip. I'm just saying, I've been reading everything.
I'm impressed.
Go ahead.
So they, if this story is true or not, we don't know, but we know it gave this really questionable origin to these two tribes that were enemies of Israel. So, look at them. No wonder we're enemies with Moab and the Moabites and the Ammonites. Look at where they came from. No wonder. So there's the story. And then we never hear from Lot. Anything else about Lot or these people again, except that they're the ancestors. So, well, there's a good reason why we're enemies with them. So is this story true? Can this story be validated in any possible way? Nope. But it sure makes a good story to hate people. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's leave Lot and his offspring in that, and let's go on to chapter 20. So we're going to read, oh, this is another, let's read chapter 20. I guess we read the whole, oh no, let's go through verse 7. We'll start there. 20, chapter 20, 1 through 7. You don't have to be too brave to read this.
I'll do it. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in the dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you've taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And didn't he also say, 'She also say he is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in a dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die."
Okay. Does this story ring any bells?
I was gonna say, geez, that's the
Yeah.
second time that he's
It happened, yeah.
said she was a sister.
Yep.
What a good husband he is. Yes. Jeez.
He's saving his own skin, possibly. But still the question comes up. If Sarah is laughing at the angel a couple chapters ago because she's way too old to have children, what king or ruler or tribal leader is going to take this woman into his harem? She's an old barren woman. So this story from the beginning just kind of says, okay, there's something else going on here. This is more of a story than an actual event. So why? Well, let's see what happens. So we've got Abimelech. And I want to tell you something else about dreams. Have any of you ever had a dream that was like something that was a prophecy or something that came true, or you felt a message from God? Okay, now I want to tell you, when I've been in Haiti, many people will tell me of these dreams they've had where God has spoken to them directly. It seems to be in that culture, but they're not dreams like we have. We often think about these dreams, but I think God speaks to people, and I've always said God speaks to people in the way that's easiest for them to hear. And I think other cultures are more open to listening to dreams. So I don't want to throw out, I think, this probably is really, this is the way that it's going to happen in other places. We're just kind of closed to it. So God says, okay, I'm going to find other ways to speak to you.
Maybe he speaks to us and we're just not smart enough to pay attention.
I think sometimes, because we've got a lot more distractions and we have most of our needs, we have more means to figure out our own problems and relying on God's than most people in the world.
Interesting.
Our mom always had dreams that she has told us throughout our whole life that God has prepared her for things. Many times.
Yeah. I had one that was incredibly powerful. And it was in a daytime, and I was camping. And I was taking a nap. I fell asleep and I had this incredibly vivid dream that that this wind came out of nowhere and the tent fell down on top of me. I was dreaming this. And I dreamed that this wind came and blew everything away that I had. And I was in the dream. I was just running around saying, God, why didn't you tell me why this was coming? I could have prepared for it. Why didn't you tell me the wind was coming? But as I went out and I was able to get everything back. That was a dream. Now, while I was having this dream, a wind came out of nowhere and knocked the tent down on top of me and this other friend that was in the tent. So that to me said, this might be something I should pay attention to. And shortly after that, a lot of things happened in my life where everything in my life just fell apart. It was a very difficult time in my life, but I got everything back. And so during that time, I thought, okay, God, you gave me that dream to prepare me for this. And I was
Wow.
able, and everything in my life came back. So
Wow.
that's my one experience with a dream. So anyway, so Abimelech had a dream, and he believed the dream. So let's see what happens. Let's go now, whatever chapter, we're 19, 8
No.
through 18.
20. 8 through.
20.
Chapter 20, verses 8 to 18.
Go ahead, read it.
I'll do it.
Thank
Nobody
you.
else is. Okay. 8 through 20.
8 through 20. 8 through 18, chapter 20.
Okay. Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, "What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and thy kingdom? You have done things to me that should not be done." And Abimelech asked Abraham, "What was your reason for doing this?" Okay. Abraham replied, "I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother." Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham. And he returned Sarah, his wife, to him. And Abimelech said, "My land is before you. Live wherever you like." So to Sarah, he said, "I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated." Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his slave girls, so they could have children again. For the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife, Sarah.
Okay. So is God pleased or sad because of what Abraham did?
Well, I think he would be sad,
Please.
but
He healed him.
didn't punish him for it.
No. Can we remember what happened in the last story that Abraham did that? Can we remember the end results? He was in Egypt. And I should have looked up ahead of time, but I don't have the reference. Can we find where Abraham did the same thing in Egypt? Because we want to go back and look at that story. And that was in chapter 12.
Okay.
Chapter 12, verse 14.
When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw she was a very beautiful woman. The Pharaoh's officials saw her. They praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake. And Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, maid servants, men servants, and maid servants, and camels. He got a lot of stuff.
Keep going,
But then-
Dan.
But
Keep
then
going.
the Lord sent plagues. But the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household because of Sarah, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and accused him sharply. What have you done to me? He demanded. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister and allowed me to take her as my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and get out of here. Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and he sent Abram out of the country along with his wife and all his possessions.
Okay. So how are the stories different?
Well, he slept with Sarah in the Egypt one, and but the chapter 21, he was going to, but he didn't. Right?
Does it say that the Pharaoh slept with her?
It implies it.
I guess so, yeah. Taken into Pharaoh's, okay. All right.
At least I think he implies it.
Yeah. Okay. And what was the end? What was the end result of the story? What happens at the very end?
Well,
Of the
Pharaoh sends him away.
Yeah.
Pharaoh kicks him out. Take everything you got. Go. I don't ever see you again.
He had to keep all his stuff. But he had to leave.
But he acquired the stuff while Sarah was with Pharaoh. It was his business. It wasn't anything that Pharaoh had given it. Okay, so what's different with this one? And then he says, "Get out of here with your stuff. I don't want to see you again because everybody's sick. Go." So what are some differences in this story?
He gets to choose where he wants to live.
Right?
Mhm.
Because he stayed in. We find out that he stays near Abimelech. He doesn't leave. Abimelech lets him stay in the country, so he's not expelled. And Abimelech gives him a whole bunch of stuff because he thinks he might have wronged Sarah.
Mhm.
And Abimelech was warned. Now Pharaoh, how did Pharaoh find out that Sarah was Abram's wife?
That's what Abram told him.
No, not he never said so. It said Pharaoh summoned Abram and said, "What you've done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife?" We don't have any idea.
The Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife. So
We don't know how he found out. But this one, we have the dream that comes to Abimelech. And then Abimelech says, "What were you doing?" And then Abraham fesses up the whole story. He says, I didn't think you had any godly parts to you, but I wasn't lying. She is my sister. Which we go back to Lot and his daughters, and that kind of creeps us out the whole way here. But different times. So Abram's changed a little bit. But to me, this story is more about the character of Pharaoh and Abimelech than it is about Abram. Why do you think I say that?
Mhm.
Well, they both were upset when they found out that she was really his wife. So were they concerned because then it would have been a sin?
Yeah, they both thought it was wrong. You don't take somebody else's wife. But Abimelech was open to God's leading. And then he immediately stops and he says, "Oh no, what have I done?" And he pays Sarah. So he's the one that's going, oh no, it was me. And Pharaoh's going, "What did you do? Your fault.
That's right.
Bad, go away." And Abimelech says, You did something wrong, but then I could have done something wrong too. So here we go. Let's here. I'll give you some gifts. Let's make peace and let's go forward. So interesting story. But also, so why would, and I don't have an answer for this one. Why did the storyteller tell this story?
Would it be because Abraham again didn't trust God to take care of things and he was trying to, take care of things himself? He was worried about getting killed, or was that?
Okay. But the storyteller told it and it came all right in the end. So it wouldn't be to tell people to make sure that you trust God, because it did come out all right in the end. So it's not a very good lesson then about trusting God. What's it a story about? Do you think Abraham ever, let's go back, ask a question. Do you think Abraham ever went back to Egypt? When that particular Pharaoh was still alive? Probably not.
Because he was smart.
He was kind of run out on a rail. You get out of here. Okay, so what happened with Abimelech and Abraham?
They lived near each other, so they
They were able to work out the problems. They were able to go through and live together, and we'll read as the story goes on that they made great peace and made covenants together. So this is a story about when you do something wrong, how you can get through it and how you can work and compromise and talk with other people and get over the problem. So I told you I didn't have an answer, but then I remembered that there was an answer in the book I was reading. Forgot. So really, this is a story about how to compromise and how to work through issues and how to come together instead of just kicking you out, and you can come together for the good of both. So there's the story. So there we are through half of chapter 20, and that's through 20. So let's see. We have enough time to start chapter 21. So we've got these little stories all pieced together. Now we're coming to the really big climax of the whole story of Abraham and Sarah. So let's read chapter 21, verses 1 through 7.
I can do that.
Okay.
Then God did as he had promised, and Sarah became pregnant and gave Abraham a baby son in his old age, at the time God had said, and Abraham named him Isaac, meaning laughter. 8 days after he was born, Abraham circumcised him as God required. Abraham was 100 years old at that time. And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this shall rejoice with me. For who would have dreamed that I would ever have a baby? Yet I have given Abraham a child in his old age.
Phew. So Abraham's 100. How old was Sarah?
I don't know.
90 something.
She was in her 90s, yeah. So she was there. So this is a pretty incredible story. The baby is here. And how often did Sarah believe that this was going to happen?
She didn't.
Never.
I know he had to keep telling her.
Well, and she took matters into her own hands.
And we
Times
talked
too
about,
bad.
right, that 100 it may not mean years, because it might mean months or something.
Well, I don't know if we said months, but the whole point of the story is Abraham was really old and Sarah was really
Yes.
old.
Right.
They were beyond. It said the way of women was past Sarah, one of the translations. So she was past menopause. So she was old.
Yeah.
Could have been. That's the whole point of this story, is they're so old. So Sarah never believed, and yet God still kept the promise. So God's promises to us aren't dependent on our own faith.
Mm.
It's dependent on God's grace. And how did Abraham, did he believe this was going to happen?
No.
It wasn't quite as saying absolutely not as Sarah was. But he was still pretty convinced. I mean, whose idea was it to have an Ishmael?
Well, that was Sarah, wasn't it?
That was Sarah. That was Sarah.
He was willing.
But he went along with it.
Along with it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the story. Let's remind ourselves of Ishmael. Where is Ishmael, and where are Ishmael and Hagar at this point in the story? Well, let's go back. So Hagar is pregnant with Ishmael, and Sarah, and she lords it over Sarah, and Sarah treats her terribly, so she runs away to the desert. And then what happens?
Get sent back.
But didn't an angel talk to her, or someone
Angel
did,
talked
to
to
tell her
her,
to go
yeah.
back?
And said, go back and do what you have to do, live with there. So we don't hear anything else about Ishmael and Hagar. So we assume that they're still there. So now, if all this time, can Hagar now lord over Sarah, the fact that she has a baby and Sarah doesn't? No.
No.
Sarah has the baby. She is so happy. She finally has this baby. It's an amazing thing. Someone who has waited and waited and waited. The birth of a child is an amazing thing for someone who's wanted one a long time, and they eventually have one. So now we're at that point. Isaac is here. Isaac is healthy, amazingly enough. So let's start in verse 8 and go to 21.
Molly, can I jump in for a second? I can't remember if you taught us this or I learned it from Liz in a different Bible study, but the reason why babies were circumcised at 8 days, do you know why it was 8 days? Because that's when a baby's blood starts to clot.
Really?
I had no idea, really.
I didn't either, and I know Liz does an awful lot of research, so I'm assuming that she's
Babies
got-
are circumcised sooner than that now.
Yeah, I know, but we also have things that to give babies to help them clot and whatever. I'm guessing, that there are things that, but in those days, that's why that 8 days was
Thing.
said by God. I thought that was interesting anyway.
Yeah.
It came up again.
Interesting. Yeah.
Anyway. All right, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So babies, so let's go on then. Verse 8 through 21.
I can start that.
Thanks, Dan.
The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders, and then set her off with her boy. She went on her way and wandered into the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, and she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat nearby, she began to sob. God, hearing the boy crying, and the angel of God God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt.
Okay.
Hmm.
Phew. So I want you to, my translation is different. I want you to tell me what word you have in verse 9 about what Ishmael, the son of Hagar, was doing.
Mocking.
You had mocking. Anybody else have
Make-
something different?
Teasing.
Making fun of her son.
Yeah, teasing.
Okay.
Playing.
Because my translation says playing.
Mine does too.
Playing. And the other, I have two translations here and said Hagar's son laughing. Just laughing.
Hmm.
So I don't know, because those are pretty different translations.
But now think about what it's like when you watch kids doing things. You might think they're just having a good time, and other people might think that there's sometimes people misinterpret. Maybe they were just playing, and maybe he was teasing, and maybe it was fun teasing, or maybe it was mean teasing. It could have
Okay,
been.
let's get the
Yep.
ages of the kids. This is going to help us. How old is Isaac?
He just got weaned.
Oh,
Well,
three
How
three
old
years,
would that be?
3 years.
3 years, probably about 3 years old, because they nursed a lot longer in those days. 3 years.
Coming.
What?
Clara is coming on.
Yep, Clara's coming. Yep. Yep. So,
Sorry, I'm late.
glad
Hi,
they.
Clara.
Hi, Clara.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Clara.
You have to read all the rest of the stuff.
You missed all the juicy stuff.
Thanks.
My
Thanks.
foot. My footnote says playing can
Okay.
also be making fun of.
Okay. All right. So, Clara, I'll tell you where we are. We are in chapter 21 of Genesis, and we are at the
Okay.
of Isaac. Isaac's been born, and he's now being weaned. There's a feast, and apparently Ishmael is probably teasing Isaac.
How
That
old was
We're in
How
verse
old?
8 and 9.
Good.
How old is Ishmael at this point in time?
Okay. How old is
Okay.
it?
Maybe 14, maybe.
He's got to be about 14 years old now. So think about a 14-year-old with a 3-year-old.
Well, think about Isaac, our Isaac, and Sammy.
Yep.
Well, Ishmael probably knows he's the oldest son, so he probably is assuming he's going to get the inheritance, and he's holding it over Isaac. So sort of that. I'm the older son, and I got it over you.
3-year-olds don't understand inheritance. That would have been meaningless, but Ishmael was there. He was probably being a normal 14-year-old kid, just kind of teasing the little one. So by the scripture, do we know at this time if Abraham is going to share, to equally divide his inheritance with the two boys? Has it already been decided, or what's going to happen with what Abraham? Remember, Abraham now is wealthy. Who's going to get his stuff? He's 100 years. He's 103 years old now. It's coming pretty soon.
Isaac's gonna go.
Well, doesn't it usually go to the firstborn?
Would go to the firstborn, but And
but
so
it would
could be.
become a slave, so.
So, and Ishmael is there, and Ishmael is definitely Abraham's son. So now
it's-
Sarah is going to jump in. She's going to
And
go,
it's said that Abraham's very much that he was upset that Sarah said that because he is his son. So probably he wanted to make sure they both got inheritance.
yeah. So Abraham recognized Ishmael as son, and he'd had him there he was 14 years old now. He'd been raising him. It was his son. And now Sarah says, I don't want this boy anywhere near my son. You get that boy out of here. Whoa, this is the other wife. This is not hers. You can see the whole situation. So what's God's answer to the problem?
Well, he says to let him go, that Ishmael will be sort of in his own right. He will have a nation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You think Abraham's happy about that?
Well, probably not.
Happy about the fact that he's going to have a nation, or happy that he has to leave?
Has to leave. I'm saying, which is he happy about? He's got to kick him out. That's his son. He's
Verse
been
12, verse 12 says that God said to him, don't be so distressed about the boy and the slave woman. So he must have been really upset.
yeah.
Sure.
And for all intents and purposes, now he said they sent him out with a skin of water and some bread out into the wilderness. So do you remember the story of Moses? He was sent out, I'm thinking I get the story right. He was sent out into the desert. Maybe that's not. There's another story where they sent someone out into the desert with a skin of water and some bread. When you send someone out into the wilderness like that, you are sending them out to die. Because they're not going to have food. They're not going to have the means to survive. They're going to die of exposure. But by giving them this much water and bread, they get far enough away from you. So they have this little bit of chance. They might live, but probably not. And they're going to be far enough away from you, so you can always think that they lived, even if they probably died. So Abraham knows he's sending them out to the wilderness to die. And God says, it's okay, you can do that. How would you react?
Yikes.
It would be tough to trust God at that point, I would think.
Yeah. Let's go back to the story of Cain and Abel. You might want to have a little trouble figuring out the connection here. The story of Cain and Abel, that Cain's sacrifice was not accepted. And Carol is going to be able to tell us what was the point of that story.
That it didn't have to do with the sacrifice. It had to do with his reaction to what God said to him,
Right.
what God did.
What God did. So this story, it doesn't really matter what they're doing. Is Abraham going to do what God said? It's okay. And Abraham's going to do it.
So this is kind of a test for Abraham, just like telling him to sacrifice Isaac.
Could be.
He's being told twice to send his sons to die.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I'd never made that connection before.
I didn't either till you said that. I didn't. I mean, that's yeah. So he's sending Hagar and Ishmael out to die. But once again, God says, and how he communicates, I don't know. Feeling bad for Clara. She's coming in and going out.
I know.
I don't know if she's getting any of this, but anyway, so how do we feel for Hagar right now?
Well, you feel bad for her, and she knows that she's basically, her son's gonna die. She's got that assumption.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, she really hasn't had a lot of control over all of this situation, has she? I mean, at one point she was mocking Sarah and, lording it over her, but in the first place, she really, I mean, she was a slave woman, and what would have happened to her if she had said no to Abraham?
Yeah.
In the first place, so she's kind of been a victim all the way through all of this, even though she didn't handle it very well.
And for a short time, because she obviously came back and she knew that she would die if she didn't start acting better.
Right.
So we don't hear anything. So she's just kind of a person on the side, still being a slave, but Abraham's got his son.
Right.
And she probably didn't have, I mean, she was the mother, but she had to be really careful. And so now Isaac's born. So she's got a little relief, maybe, and nope, boom, out she goes. She's led a pretty miserable life. So, but God hears it, and we know that Ishmael survived, and she survived. And the kicker is the last line. What's the last line?
His mother got a wife for him from Egypt.
Ooh. Ooh. Why am I saying ooh?
I don't know.
What's so significant about that? Why did she go to Egypt in the first place? What nationality was Hagar?
Ooh, Egyptian.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so now we got a pretty good idea why she went back to Egypt.
Mm.
I'm going home to mother. Okay, she's going back to her tribe, her family, and he gets a wife. So if Ishmael had stayed with Abraham, if Sarah hadn't kicked them out, who would Ishmael have probably married?
Somebody from
Somebody from that tribe or around there. Definitely not an Egyptian.
Mm-hmm.
And so these babies then would have come and they would have been kin right in this mix of it. But now we've got this lineage that's really separate. This alternate tribe, this other. So Sarah, not trusting God, created the Ishmael. And then because of her intolerance and her selfishness, she then solidified these two tribes that are going to be butting their heads forever. So you see that sin that's in there, that selfishness of Sarah, that the hurtfulness, the whatever's happening with Sarah, it created all of these problems. Are we going to ever hear about Ishmael again in the story of Abraham? Is that done? I don't know. Nope. Nope. We're going to hear about Ishmael again because he is going to come back with Isaac and they're going to bury Abraham together. So I'll give you that little spoiler alert there.
Well, I was going to say that was a spoiler. Well, there's no point in coming for the next couple of weeks now, is there?
Okay. So that tells us that Isaac maintains a relationship with Ishmael. that that's his brother. And so he maintains that, even though his mother has been pretty awful. So just that little spoiler alert there, but that's a pretty powerful story of Abraham following, and maybe that was God's intention to allow Ishmael to become, because if Ishmael had stayed within the tribe, he would have always been secondary to Isaac. But
Right.
then he had his own tribe, his own nation. So maybe God said, this is going to be okay. Take him out of this toxic situation, and we're going to go a different route. This is going to be okay. So it doesn't really matter what we do. It's about trusting God. And God will find a way no matter what. Dottie's over here singing in the bed. God will make a way. Be no way. Yeah. Okay. We're getting to the end. I'm going to read the last one because it's not a huge story. And we need to do that before we get to the next one. So let's read from 22 to the end of the chapter, because it's just kind of, after all of this great big story, this is just kind of like little piece at the end of here to just kind of close this chapter out. So 22 to 34.
I could read that.
Thank you.
Oh, hi, Claire. We're glad you're back.
There she is.
Thank you. We're on verse 22.
Of chapter 21.
Yeah, chapter 21, verse 22. About this time, Abimelech came with Phicol, his army commander, to visit Abraham. God is obviously with you, helping you in everything you do, Abimelech said. Swear to me in God's name that you will never deceive me, my children, or any of my descendants. I have been loyal to you, so now swear that you will be loyal to me and to this country where you are living as a foreigner. Abraham replied, yes, I swear to it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well that Abimelech's servants had taken by force from Abraham's servants. This is the first I've heard of it, Abimelech answered. I have no idea who is responsible. You have never complained about this before. Abraham then gave some of his sheep, goats, and cattle to Abimelech, and they made a treaty. But Abraham also took 7 additional female lambs and set them off by themselves. Abimelech asked, why have you set these 7 apart from the others? Abraham replied, please accept these 7 lambs to show your agreement that I dug this well. Then he named this place Beersheba, which means well of the oath, because that was where they had sworn the oath. After making their covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech left with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned home to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he worshiped the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham lived as a foreigner in Philistine country for a long time.
Okay. And once again, this whole story is just kind of showing you how Abimelech and Abraham continued to get along after the incident with Sarah, the wife's sister. But what is this thing about the 7 lambs?
Mine says, Abraham replied, they are my gift to you as a public confirmation that this well is mine.
Okay. And it was named Beersheba. And let's see, let me find this.
Well of the oath is what mine
Well
said.
of the oath, or Sheba meant 7. So it's just kind of a,
Well of 7.
yeah, so it's well of 7. So they had the 7 sheep. And so is it somebody going backwards trying to say, how can we explain this name? I don't know. But did you notice the last name in the last verse of that passage?
Philistines?
Philistines.
Yeah,
Philistines weren't around.
already Philistine.
Okay, Carol's making faces.
Philistia.
Philistines.
Philistia.
Philistines were the arch enemies.
Yeah,
I know. Can you name one famous Philistine?
Goliath.
Goliath.
Goliath was a Philistine. Big arch enemies. So the storyteller here is going, you can get along with people. You can get along with others. Abraham was able to do this for a long time, and he said they stayed for a long time in that place, and he lived as an immigrant in the Philistines' land for a long time. So is there a moral story there? Jabbing it in a little bit. We can learn to get along with other people that aren't us.
Mhm.
That's, if that story is there for that reason. We got all these other stories. We think, why is the storyteller telling us? This whole story was, and he puts the kicker at the end, just like he put the kicker at the end with Hagar, and he got him an Egyptian wife. Oh no! This one, and Abraham lived in the land for a long time, in the land of the Philistines.
Ah,
Can you see that? Can you see the storyteller in here? Just
Yeah.
telling this innocent little story, and then ding, the kicker at the end. Now go to bed and think about it. So think about who your Philistines are.
Mm.
So next week we're going to go with a story, and I have the weirdest twist on this story.
We're sure you do.
This one, and I'll have to tell you where I got it from. It's a really interesting story when we get to that. But anybody, any questions or anything before I shut off the recording? Okay, so next week we will go to the sacrifice of Isaac. All right, and I will say goodnight to all the listeners.